the dancer who took the grooms created by A.Deneen, Priso, Roots and Rhythms, African Folktales channel. I'll never forget the way my brother Tunde looked that day. His eyes were hollow, his body stiff, like he wasn't himself anymore. It still haunts me how quickly he changed, like someone had reached inside him and stolen his soul. That moment plays in my head over and over again. It was supposed to be the happiest day of his life, his wedding to Amaka. But everything went wrong because of her Aduke. The wedding dancer, the witch. I know you're thinking this sounds crazy. I didn't believe in witchcraft before either. I thought it was just old stories the elders told us to keep us scared. But after what I saw, after what happened to Tunde, I can't explain it any other way. The wedding started out beautifully. Tunde and Amaka were the perfect couple. They had been together for years, and everyone in the village loved them. My family was so proud. My mother spent weeks cooking food for the celebration, and the whole village helped set up the decorations. When the big day came, everything was perfect. The sun was shining, the drums were playing, and the crowd was cheering. Tunde was laughing and holding Amaka's hand as they walked to the center of the gathering. She looked stunning in her white lace dress, and he looked like the happiest man alive. The ceremony was quick, just the way Tunde liked it. Then it was time for the reception, the big party. That's when Aduke showed up. Aduke wasn't from our village. No one knew exactly where she came from, but she had been at every wedding in the area for the past year. People said she was the best wedding dancer around, that her movements could bless the couple and bring them good fortune. When she arrived, it was like the air shifted. The drums got louder and the crowd buzzed with excitement. Aduke walked into the clearing like she owned the place. She was beautiful, tall and graceful, with long braids that shimmered in the sunlight. She wore a red wrap skirt and a gold top that sparkled with every step she took. But there was something about her eyes. They were sharp, almost too sharp, like they could see right through you. And when she smiled, it didn't feel warm, it felt like a warning. The drummers started playing faster as Aduke stepped into the center of the clearing. She had the wedding cake knife in her hand, twirling it like it was part of her body. She moved to the rhythm, her hips swaying, her feet gliding across the ground like she wasn't even touching it. The crowd cheered, clapping and throwing money at her feet. At first, I was mesmerized, just like everyone else. But then I noticed something strange. Aduke wasn't looking at the crowd. She wasn't even looking at the couple. She was staring straight at Tunde. He didn't seem to notice at first. He was smiling, holding Amaka's hand, watching like everyone else. But then his smile faded. His grip on Amaka's hand loosened. His body went rigid, like he was frozen in place. Tunde? Amaka whispered, shaking his arm. He didn't respond. Then, as Aduke spun closer to the couple, Tunde stood up. He didn't look at Amaka. He didn't look at anyone. He just walked toward Aduke, like he was being pulled by an invisible thread. The crowd fell silent. My mother gasped, and Amaka grabbed Tunde's arm, trying to pull him back. "Tunde, what are you doing?" she cried. But Tunde didn't even blink. He walked right up to Aduke and stopped in front of her. She smiled, this slow, knowing smile that made my stomach turn. She raised the knife and drew a circle in the air around Tunde. The drum stopped for a moment and the air felt heavy, like we were all underwater. When the drum started again, Tunde fell to his knees. Aduke leaned down, whispered something in his ear, and then turned and walked away. At first, we thought Tunde was fine. He stood up, dusted himself off, and walked back to his seat like nothing had happened. The crowd started clapping nervously, and the party went on. But something was different about Tunde. He wasn't smiling anymore. He barely spoke to anyone, not even Amaka. When it was time to cut the cake, Tunde held the knife like he didn't know what to do with it. Amaka has had to guide his hand. Everyone laughed it off, saying he was just overwhelmed. But I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't there anymore. That night, Tunde disappeared. We searched everywhere. The elders said he must have gotten cold feet and run away. But I knew that wasn't true. Tunde wasn't the type to run. Something had taken him. The next morning, a group of us went into the forest to look for him. We searched for hours, calling his name, but there was no sign of him. Just as we were about to give up, we found him sitting by the riverbank. He was soaking wet, staring at the water like he was in a trance. His clothes were muddy and his shoes were gone. When we called out to him, he didn't respond. We had to carry him back to the village. When he finally spoke, he didn't remember anything. Not the wedding, not a duke, not even Amaka. He kept mumbling about water and how it was calling to him. My mother cried for days. The elders finally admitted what we were all thinking. Aduke was a witch. They said she used her dance to cast spells and steal the spirits of men. They told us she had been seen at other weddings where grooms had disappeared or gone mad. Amaka was devastated. She stayed with us for a while, hoping Tunde would get better, but he didn't. He's still alive, but he's not the same. It's like he's just a shell of the person he used to be. Since then, a duke hasn't been seen. Some people say she's gone, that the gods have punished her for what she did, but I don't believe that. I think she's out there waiting for her next wedding, her next victim. If you ever see a dancer who moves like the wind, who makes the air feel heavy and cold, run. Don't let her take anyone else. And if you hear the drum stop, even for a second, hold on to the ones you love. Because once she has them, they're gone forever. After Tunde's wedding, the village stopped talking about it. People whispered behind closed doors, but no one dared to say a duke's name out loud. It was as if everyone believed that speaking of her would summon her back. Weddings became smaller, quieter, almost secretive. The dancers stopped performing. The joy of our celebrations was gone. My family tried to move on too, but how do you move on when the person you love is still there but no longer themselves? Tunde would sit by the window for hours, staring at nothing. He stopped eating much, stopped talking, stopped being. Tunde. Amaka tried to stay hopeful. She would bring him food, tell him stories, hold his hand, but it was no use. One day she packed her things and left. He's gone, she told me, tears streaming down her face. The man I love is gone. My mother begged the elders to help, but they said there was nothing they could do. Aduke's magic is not of this world, they said. It is ancient, dangerous. Even speaking her name brings risk. But I couldn't let it go. I couldn't accept that this was Tunde's fate. One evening, as the sun was setting, a strange old woman came to our house. She wore a tattered wrapper and carried a staff that looked older than she was. Her eyes were cloudy, but her voice was strong. "You are the sister," she said, pointing at me. I froze. "Who are you?" She didn't answer my question. Instead, she stepped closer and said, "The dancer. You must stop her." I laughed bitterly. "Stop her? How? No one even knows where she is." "She will come again," the woman said. "And when she does, you must be ready. There is a way to break her spell, but it is dangerous, you all." "What way?" I asked, my heart pounding. The woman leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "When she dances, she draws her power from the knife. You must take it from her before the final spin. But be warned, if you fail, she will take you too." Before I could ask her anything else, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the night like a ghost. A year passed. The news spread that there was going to be a big wedding in a neighboring village. The groom was someone I knew, a childhood friend. named Kunle. I hadn't seen him in years, but when I heard a duke might be there, I knew I had to go. When I arrived, everything felt normal. The decorations were beautiful, the food smelled amazing, and the couple looked happy. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. And then I saw her. A duke was standing near the drummers, her face calm and expressionless. She hadn't aged a day. Her braids were longer, her gold top brighter, but it was her. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. I had made up my mind. I was going to stop her. I waited until the dance began. The crowd was cheering, clapping, throwing money, just like they had at Tunde's wedding. A duke moved with the same grace, her body flowing like water. She held a knife in her hand, spinning it effortlessly. Kunle was smiling at first, but then his face changed. I knew that look. It was the same empty, lost expression Tunde had. His bride, Yemi, was tugging at his arm, but he was already under a duke's spell. He stood up, his eyes fixed on her. I pushed my way through the crowd, my heart pounding. I didn't have a plan, I just knew I had to get that knife. As Kunle walked toward Aduk, I reached out and grabbed his arm. "Kunle, stop!" I shouted. He didn't even look at me. He kept walking, and Aduk's smile grew wider. She raised the knife, drawing a circle in the air. I lunged forward, grabbing for the knife. For a moment, I thought I had it, but Aduk was fast, too fast. She spun away, her eyes blazing with anger. "You dare to challenge me?" she hissed. Her voice was low, cold, and inhuman. The crowd gasped and stepped back. The drummers stopped playing. For the first time, a duke looked unsettled. I held my ground even though my legs were shaking. "Let him go," I said, my voice trembling. "You've done enough." A duke tilted her head, studying me. Then she laughed. She's a sharp, cruel sound that echoed in the silence. "You think you can stop me?" she said. "You are nothing." She raised the knife again, and the air grew heavy. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't breathe. I thought I was going to die. But then, out of nowhere, Yemi stepped forward. "Take me instead," she said. Everyone froze. A duke stared at her, surprised. "You would give yourself up for him?" she asked. Yemi nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I love him. Take me and leave him alone." For a moment, a duke seemed to consider it. Then slowly, she lowered the knife. "Very well," she said. "But know this, love cannot save him. Only strength can." Before anyone could react, a duke spun around and disappeared into the shadows. The knife clattered to the ground, and the air felt lighter again. Kun collapsed, gasping for air. Yemi ran to him, holding him tightly. He was shaken but alive. The spell was broken, for now. The elders warned that a duke would return, that her hunger for power would never end. But I don't care. I'll be ready next time. If you ever hear about a dancer who moves like the wind, who makes the drum sound darker, heavier, leave. Don't watch. Don't stay. And whatever you do, don't let her see you. Because once she does, she won't stop until she takes what she wants. Even after the wedding ended, the fear didn't leave. Kunle was back to himself, but he seemed different, quieter, more hesitant. He avoided talking about Aduk or what had happened during the dance. Yemi refused to leave his side, constantly watching him, as if afraid he might vanish if she looked away for too long. The elders gathered the next morning, their faces grave. They burned incense and made offerings at the village shrine, praying for protection, but their words weren't comforting. Aduk is not just a witch, one of them said. She is a spirit, a being tied to something much older than us. My stomach dropped. How do we stop her for good? The elder shook his head. You don't. Spirits like Aduk cannot be killed. They can only be avoided. You were lucky this time. Lucky. That's what they called it. But it didn't feel like luck. It felt like a warning, a reminder that she wasn't done. After that wedding, I couldn't stop thinking about Tunde. I visited him every day, hoping he'd show some sign of improvement. But he was the same, silent, distant, like a shadow of the person he used to be. One evening, I found him sitting by the river again, staring at the water. This time, I sat beside him. "Tunde," I said softly, "do you remember anything? Anything at all?" For a long time, he didn't answer. I thought he hadn't heard me. But then, in the faintest voice, he said, "She's still watching." I froze. "Who? A duke?" He nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the rippling water. "I see her in my dreams. She calls to me. She wants me to come back." A chill ran down my spine. "You're safe," I whispered. "She can't hurt you anymore." But Tunde shook his head. "She's not finished, not with me, not with anyone." Desperate for answers, I sought out the old woman who had warned me when at Kunle's wedding. She was hard to find, living deep in the forest in a hut made of sticks and mud. When I finally reached her, she looked at me like she'd been expecting me. "You've seen her again," she said. "Yes," I replied. "And she's still tormenting my brother. Please tell me how to stop her." The woman sighed and motioned for me to sit. "Aduke was not always a spirit," she began. "She was once a woman like you, beautiful, proud, and full of life. But she was betrayed by love, by her family, by the people she trusted most. In her anger, she turned to forbidden magic, seeking revenge. That magic consumed her, turning her into what she is now." "Why does she target grooms?" I asked. "Because she was betrayed on her wedding day," the woman said. "The man she loved left her for another. Now, she takes what was taken from her over and over again." I swallowed hard. "Is there no way to stop her?" The woman leaned closer, her eyes piercing. "There is one way, but it is dangerous." "Tell me," I said without hesitation. She reached into a pouch and pulled out a small black stone. "This is an eye-oken, a stone that binds spirits to the earth. If you place it in the knife she uses, it will trap her. But to do so, you must face her during the dance. If she sees what you are doing, she will kill you." I didn't care about the risks. I couldn't let Aduke ruin anyone else's life. I took the stone and waited, knowing it was only a matter of time before she appeared again. A few months later, word spread of another wedding. This time, it was in our own village. The groom, Emeka, was a kind man who had helped rebuild homes after the last flood. His bride, Ngozi, was sweet and shy, always smiling. They didn't deserve to be her victims. I approached the family quietly, warning them about Aduke. At first, they didn't believe me. But when the elders confirmed my story, they agreed to let me try to stop her. When Aduke arrived, it was like nothing had changed. She walked into the clearing, her head high, her movements fluid and hypnotic. The crowd fell silent as the drum started and she began to dance. I stayed at the edge of the gathering, clutching the stone in my hand. My heart was pounding so loudly I thought she might hear it. As she spun closer to the couple, I edged forward, trying to blend in with the crowd. Emeka was already falling under her spell. His face had that same blank look, his body swaying as if being pulled by invisible strings. Ngozi was crying, begging him to stay, but he was already walking toward Aduke. I took a deep breath and stepped forward. Aduke raised the knife, spinning it in her hand, and I lunged. I slammed the stone into the hilt of the knife, and for a moment everything froze. Aduke's eyes widened, her body going rigid. The air grew cold, and the drum stopped abruptly. "You dare!" she screamed, her voice echoing like thunder. Her face twisted with fury, and the crowd scattered, screaming. But I didn't let go. I held the knife, with both hands forcing the stone deeper into it. The blade began to glow, emitting a strange dark light. A duke shrieked, her body writhing as the magic took hold. Finally, with one last cry, she collapsed, her body dissolving into ash. The knife clattered to the ground, lifeless. When it was over, Emeka blinked, as if waking from a dream. He looked around, confused but unharmed. Ngozi ran to him, sobbing with relief. The crowd slowly returned, murmuring in disbelief. The elders said the binding had worked, that the duke was gone. But I'm not so sure. Sometimes, late at night, I feel like I can still hear the faint beat of drums in the distance. If she ever returns, I'll be ready. But if you hear the drums, if you see the dancer with the knife, don't wait. Don't watch, run. And whatever you do, don't look her in the eye. Please like and subscribe to our channel.